The sky above the floodplain bleeds from charcoal to ash gray, then softens into pale gold as the sun climbs beyond a ridge of volcanic hills. Mist clings to the channels and oxbow pools that snake across the mudflats, and in that half-light the air smells of wet clay, crushed ferns, and the faint sulfur tang drifting from distant fumaroles. A heron-sized pterosaur glides low over the water, wingtips brushing the surface and leaving twin ripples that fade into the current. Somewhere upstream, a log shifts in the shallows, rolled by the night's rain, and a school of small fish scatters in silver panic. The land here lies near the middle latitudes of a supercontinent, slowly tearing itself apart, Pangaea fragmenting into pieces that will drift for millions of years, and the climate swings between monsoon wet and furnace dry. This morning, the wet season lingers, clouds stacked along the horizons, thunder muttering in the distance like a conversation held just out of earshot. The first footfalls shake the ground before the animals come into view. A herd of Camarasaurus emerges from a stand of tall conifers, each step a soft percussion that travels through the saturated earth. There are 7 of them, adults and 2 half-grown young, necks swaying as they walk, skin wrinkled and gray-brown, mottled with patches of green algae where water has pooled in the folds. They move toward a grove of cycads clustered on a low rise, and the lead female pauses to sniff the air, nostrils flaring, eyes dark and watchful. One of the juveniles nuzzles her flank, and she rumbles deep in her chest, a sound felt more than heard. The cycads are heavy with seed cones, rust-red and sticky with resin, and the sauropods begin to feed, cropping the fronds with blunt teeth, swallowing without chewing, letting their gut stones do the grinding later. Above them, a flock of small pterosaurs wheels and chatters, snatching insects stirred up by the giant's passage. In the shadow of a sandstone bluff, half a mile away, an Allosaurus lies in the shade of a gnarled Araucaria. She is 9 meters long, powerfully built, her scales the color of sun-dried mud streaked with darker bands along her flanks. Her jaw still bears flecks of dried blood from a scavenged carcass 2 days prior, and she watches the Camarasaurus herd with lazy interest, head resting on her forearms, tail curled around her haunches. Hunting alone is risky, and she is patient. The morning heat is building, and she flicks her tongue, tasting the air for moisture, for the scent of weaker prey. A dragonfly as long as a human hand lands on a rock near her snout, wings shimmering iridescent green, and she ignores it. The sun climbs higher, burning off the mist, and the floodplain emerges in full detail. Braided channels edged with horsetails, islands of fern thickets, boulder fields studded with logs turned to stone by ancient floods. Further inland, where the ground rises into rolling highlands cloaked in conifer forest, the air is cooler and the light filters through needles and shifting curtains of gold and shadow. A stegosaurus browses among tree ferns at the forest edge, her plated back catching the sun in a display of muted reds and purples, the color muted by a film of dust. She is alone, having wandered from her loosely affiliated group, and she moves with deliberate care, each footfall tested before weight shifts forward. Her tail spikes swing gently as she turns her head to crop a cluster of fern shoots, and when a branch snaps somewhere in the deeper woods, she freezes, listening. The snap is followed by silence, then the scuff of something heavy moving through the undergrowth. She backs toward open ground, plates rising slightly, a warning to whatever might be watching. But the sound fades, and after a long moment, she resumes feeding, though her eyes keep flicking toward the shadows. The forest here is a cathedral of columns, trunks rising 30 meters before the first branches, the canopy a latticework, filtering the sky into fragments. Beetles scuttle over bark, and the air hums with the drone of cicadas, a sound that rises and falls like breath. A small mammal, no larger than a rat, darts from a hollow log to a tangle of roots, pauses with whiskers twitching, then vanishes into a burrow. These creatures are secretive, nocturnal by preference, but hunger sometimes drives them into daylight. This one clutches a seed in tiny paws and gnaws it quickly, always listening, always ready to bolt. Overhead, a primitive bird, no bigger than a crow, flits between branches, feathers dark and oily, claws gripping bark as it pecks for insects in the crevices. Its wings are edged with clawed fingers, and it clambers as much as it flies, a creature caught between ancient and modern, an experiment in evolution. By midday the heat is oppressive, the sky a bleached dome, and many animals retreat to shade or water. Near a wide bend in the main river channel, a pair of diplodocus stand belly-deep in the sluggish current, water swirling around their pillared legs. They are immense, necks extending forward like living bridges, tails trailing behind in the shallows. One dips her head to drink, lips parted, and the water dimples and flows into her mouth in a steady stream. The other raises his neck and scans the opposite bank, where a cluster of crocodilian shapes bask on a sandbar, armored and motionless, save for the occasional flick of a tail. The crocodilians are ancient lineages, older than the dinosaurs' dominance, and they watch the sauropods with indifferent eyes, too small to threaten creatures of such size, content to wait for easier prey. Upstream, where the channel narrows and the current quickens over gravel beds, a young Allosaurus picks his way along the bank. He is smaller than the female, resting near the bluff, leaner, still learning the rhythms of the hunt. His scales are brighter, greener, and he moves with the restless energy of youth. He pauses to drink, lapping at the water, then lifts his head sharply as a scent catches his attention. Somewhere nearby is carrion, or perhaps an injured animal, and he turns to follow the trail, nostrils flaring, eyes narrowed against the glare. The scent leads him to a thicket of horsetails where a juvenile ornithopod lies half-hidden, panting in the shade, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The ornithopod sees the predator and tries to rise, but the leg buckles and it collapses with a bleat of distress. The Allosaurus steps closer, head lowering, and the moment stretches taut. Then he lunges, jaws snapping shut, and the struggle is brief and final. He feeds quickly, tearing chunks of flesh, always watchful for scavengers that might challenge him. While he eats, the sky to the west darkens. Clouds build into towering anvils, bruised purple at the base, white and radiant at their peaks, and the wind picks up, gusting across the floodplain in hot pulses. The temperature drops suddenly, and the air smells of rain and ozone. The Camarasaurus herd lifts their heads, uneasy, and the juveniles press close to the adults. The first raindrops fall fat and warm, kicking up tiny craters in the dust, and within moments the sky opens and the rain comes in sheets, hammering the ground, turning the dust to mud, filling the channels and pools to overflowing. The Allosaurus by the river abandons his kill and trots toward the shelter of a rock overhang, tail held high for balance, water streaming off his scales. The diplodocus in the river barely react, already wet, and they continue to graze on submerged vegetation, only their necks and backs visible above the roiling surface. The storm moves fast, rolling eastward toward the coast, and in its wake the land steams. Sunlight breaks through the clouds in broad shafts, illuminating curtains of rain still falling in the distance, and a double rainbow arcs across the valley, colors vivid against the bruised sky. Puddles reflect the light, and the scent of wet earth and crushed plants fills the air. Insects emerge in clouds, and the pterosaurs return to feast, diving and swooping, calling to one another in sharp cries. A pair of small theropods, no taller than a child, dash from cover to snatch beetles from the mud, their movements quick and bird-like, heads bobbing, tails rigid for balance. They chirp to each other in high-pitched notes, and when one catches a particularly large beetle, it dashes away, the other in pursuit. A brief squabble that ends when the thief gulps the prize down whole. As afternoon lengthens, the landscape shifts toward the coast, where the highlands descend into a broad coastal plain crossed by tidal channels and backed by fields of low dunes. The air here tastes of salt, and the wind carries the rhythmic crash and hiss of waves on a shallow shore. The ocean is warm, turquoise over pale sand, deeper blue where channels cut through to open water. Islands dot the horizon, volcanic cones trailing thin plumes of smoke, and the water between them is alive with movement. A school of fish churns the surface, pursued by something larger, and birds wheel overhead, plunging in to steal what they can. Further out, a plesiosaur surfaces to breathe, neck extended, water streaming from its flanks. Then it dives again, disappearing with barely a ripple. Near the shore, a Brachiosaurus browses among a scattered stand of conifers, her long neck allowing her to reach foliage 20 meters above the ground. She is the largest animal in sight, her body a mountain of muscle and bone, skin thick and gray, textured like bark. She feeds with mechanical patience, stripping branches with peg-like teeth, barely pausing to breathe. Below her, a group of smaller herbivores, low slung and armored, root among the ferns for tubers, snorting and grunting as they dig. They are wary of the surf, which surges higher with each incoming tide, and they keep to the dune-backed margin, where the sand is firm and the plants grow thick. A gust of wind bends the ferns and sends a spray of salt mist across the plain, and the animals shake their heads, blinking against the sting. The tide is rising, pushed by the pull of a moon slightly closer than it will be in later eons, and the water creeps up the tidal flats, filling channels and isolating sandbars. A juvenile pterosaur, wings still awkward, lands on a stranded log and preens, scraping its beak through the fur-like filaments that cover its body. It is learning to fish, but so far has caught nothing, and it eyes the water with a mixture of hunger and frustration. A wave surges past the log, and the pterosaur hops to keep its feet dry, wings half spread for balance. In the shallows, a crab scuttles sideways, claws raised, and the pterosaur lunges, stabbing with its beak, but the crab dodges and vanishes into the sand. The pterosaur squawks in annoyance and flaps to a new perch, determined to try again. Inland from the shore, where the dunes give way to a mosaic of fern prairie and seasonal wetlands, a herd of Apatosaurus grazes in the golden light of late afternoon. They are broad-bodied and long-tailed, moving in a loose cluster, the adults on the outside, the young sheltered in the center. The prairie here stretches to the horizon, broken only by scattered groves of cycads and low ridges of weathered rock. The ferns grow waist-high to a human, and they ripple in the wind like water, a green sea under a vast sky. The Apatosaurus feed constantly, necks sweeping side to side, mouths cropping the ferns with rhythmic precision. One of the juveniles pauses to scratch against a boulder, rubbing her flank against the rough surface, eyes half closed in contentment. The herd drifts slowly westward, following the freshest growth, and their footsteps leave a trail of crushed plants and deep prints that will fill with water and become tiny ponds by morning. A shadow passes overhead, swift and silent, and the herd tenses. The shadow belongs to a large pterosaur, wings spanning more than 10 meters, soaring on thermals rising from the sun-warmed plain. It is a fisher built for gliding, and it rides the updrafts with minimal effort, eyes scanning the wetlands for movement. It spots a cluster of fish trapped in a shrinking pool and banks into a descending spiral, wings tilting, adjusting to the changing airspeed. At the last moment, it extends its legs, opens its beak, and plunges into the water with a splash that sends ripples racing outward. It emerges with a fish wriggling in its jaws, beats its wings heavily to gain altitude, and flaps toward a distant roosting site, calling in triumph as it goes. The sun descends toward the western horizon, and the light turns amber, then gold, stretching the shadows long across the land. The temperature begins to drop, and the wind shifts, carrying the cooler air down from the highlands. On the floodplain, the female Allosaurus stirs from her rest, yawning to reveal rows of serrated teeth, then rises to her feet and shakes herself. She has rested through the heat of the day, and now hunger drives her to move. She sets off at a steady walk, head low, nostrils testing the wind, and her path takes her toward the river, where the Diplodocus pair still lingers. She does not approach directly, but circles downwind, moving through the cover of fern thickets, patient and calculating. The Diplodocus are too large to bring down alone, but if one is old or sick, or if a juvenile strays from the safety of deep water, opportunity might present itself. She watches from the shadows as the sauropods begin to move toward dry land, the day's heat fading and the night's routines beginning. The larger of the two, the male, climbs the bank first, water streaming from his belly, each step deliberate and ponderous. The female follows, slower, and the Allosaurus notes the hitch in her gait, a stiffness in one foreleg that suggests an old injury or infection. The predator's eyes narrow, and she sinks lower into the ferns, muscles coiling, but the Diplodocus pair does not separate, and they move together toward a grove of conifers, where other sauropods are already gathering for the night. The Allosaurus watches them go, then turns away, still hunting, unwilling to risk injury in a confrontation she cannot win. As dusk settles, the coastal plain transforms. The sky deepens to violet, then indigo, and the first stars prick into visibility. The ocean reflects the fading light, a sheet of hammered silver, and the waves continue their endless rhythm, surging and retreating, carving the shore anew with each tide. Along the beach, shells and driftwood mark the high tide line, and a cluster of small scavenging dinosaurs picks through the debris, chirping and squabbling over finds. They are quick and nervous, constantly scanning the sky and the dune line for threats, and when a larger pterosaur lands nearby they scatter, regrouping only after it settles to roost on a weathered stump. In the highlands, night comes faster, the forest swallowing the last light, and the Stegosaurus, who browsed alone earlier, has rejoined her group. They settle in a clearing, a half-dozen individuals arranged in a rough circle, plates cooling in the evening air, tails occasionally swishing to discourage the biting insects that emerge at dusk. The forest around them is alive with sound. The chirr of crickets, the rustle of unseen mammals in the leaf litter, the distant hoot of a pterosaur settling into its roost. A faint glow pulses in the undergrowth, bioluminescent fungi growing on a rotting log, and a beetle lands on the glow, silhouetted against the eerie light. The Stegosaurus herd rests, but does not sleep deeply, always alert, always listening for the crack of a branch or the scrape of claws that might signal danger. On the floodplain, the night shift begins. Small mammals emerge from burrows, venturing cautiously into the open, noses twitching, ears swiveling to catch every sound. They forage for seeds, insects, carrion, whatever can sustain them through the hours before dawn. One climbs a fallen log and pauses at the top, silhouetted against the rising moon, a thin crescent that casts just enough light to paint the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. The mammal freezes as a shape glides overhead, a night-hunting pterosaur with wide eyes and a furred body, silent as an owl. The mammal waits, motionless, until the pterosaur has passed, then scurries down the far side of the log and vanishes into a thicket. The Camarasaurus herd has gathered near a cluster of cycads, the adults forming a protective ring around the juveniles, and they settle into a standing rest, eyes half closed, occasionally shifting weight from one leg to another. Their breathing is slow and deep, and the sound blends with the rustle of wind through the ferns and the distant rumble of thunder from a new storm building on the horizon. Lightning flickers within the clouds, illuminating them from within, and the smell of rain drifts on the breeze. But the storm is far off, moving south, and the floodplain remains dry, the air warm and thick with the scent of growing things and the earth's slow exhalations. Near the river, the young Allosaurus, who fed earlier on the injured ornithopod, has claimed a territory along a sandy bank. He paces the perimeter, marking it with scent, scraping the ground with his claws, establishing his presence. Another theropod, a rival of similar size, approaches from downstream, and the two face each other, heads lowering, mouths opening in silent threat displays. They circle, tails lashing, and for a moment it seems they will fight, but the newcomer breaks away first, unwilling to risk injury, and trots off into the darkness. The young Allosaurus watches him go, then settles near the water's edge, alert but resting, conserving energy for the hunts to come. Out on the coastal plain, the Apatosaurus herd has stopped for the night, near a shallow wetland where the water reflects the stars in broken fragments. The adults drink deeply, sucking in gallons at a time, while the juveniles splash and play, testing their strength against each other in gentle shoving matches. One of the adults rumbles a low warning, and the juveniles quiet, pressing close as the herd settles into stillness. The night is alive with the calls of frogs, a chorus that rises from every pool and puddle, a sound as old as the amphibians themselves. The frogs are descendants of lineages that survived the great extinctions of earlier eras, and they thrive here in the warm, wet climate, their numbers beyond counting. Above, the Milky Way blazes in a band of light, undimmed by any artificial glow, a river of stars arching from horizon to horizon. The constellations are different here, the stars arranged in patterns that no human eye will ever see, because the slow wobble of Earth's axis has not yet brought them into the configurations that will one day guide navigators and inspire myths. A meteor streaks across the sky, a brief flare of light, and then another, remnants of a comet's tail, burning up in the atmosphere. The pterosaurs roosting along the shore stir and mutter, but do not take flight, accustomed to the sky's restless beauty. In the forest, a pair of small theropods roost in the branches of a conifer, tucked into the crook where a limb meets the trunk. They are covered in a coat of downy feathers, and they huddle together for warmth, beaks tucked under their wings. Below them, a mammal creeps along a branch, investigating a hole where beetles might be hiding, and one of the theropods opens an eye, watches for a moment, then settles back to sleep. The mammal finds nothing and retreats, and the forest grows quieter as the night deepens, the sounds spacing out, the silences between them lengthening. On the coast, the tide has turned and begun to ebb, and the water retreats from the flats, leaving behind a glistening expanse of wet sand and stranded pools where small fish flip and struggle. The scavenging dinosaurs return, drawn by the bounty, and they wade into the shallows, snapping at the fish, gobbling them down whole. A larger predator watches from the dune line, considering, but the scavengers are too scattered and too quick, and the predator settles back onto its haunches, content to wait for a better opportunity. The ocean itself is calm now, the waves reduced to gentle swells that hiss across the sand, and the horizon is a dark line beneath a sky crowded with stars. Miles inland, the female Allosaurus has found new prey. A lone Stegosaurus, separated from its group, injured or perhaps simply old, struggles to keep pace as it moves through the darkness. The predator follows at a distance, patient, letting the herbivore tire itself, and when the Stegosaurus pauses to rest, leaning against a boulder for support, the Allosaurus moves closer. The herbivore senses the danger and turns to face the threat, tail swinging, spikes gleaming faintly in the starlight, but its movements are slow and the injured leg will not bear weight. The Allosaurus circles, testing for weakness, and the Stegosaurus pivots to keep the predator in sight, but each turn is labored, each breath more ragged. The confrontation is inevitable, and when it comes, it is swift, the predator darting in low, avoiding the tail spikes, jaws closing on the exposed throat, and the struggle ends in stillness. The Allosaurus feeds briefly, tearing meat from the carcass, but she is cautious, aware that the scent of blood will draw others. She drags the kill into a thicket of ferns, covering it with vegetation, marking it with scent, then retreats to a nearby rise to watch and wait. Within an hour, the scavengers arrive, smaller theropods that slink from the shadows, hissing and snapping at each other as they vie for access to the carcass. The Allosaurus watches, but does not intervene, too full to contest the scraps, and eventually she turns away and begins the long walk back to her preferred territory near the bluff. The night wears on, and the moon sets, leaving only the stars to light the land. The temperature drops further, and a mist rises from the wetlands and river channels, thickening the air, muffling sound. The world becomes a place of half-seen shapes and muted colors, and the animals move carefully, relying on scent and sound more than sight. A herd of small ornithopods huddles in a hollow, their body heat creating a pocket of warmth in the chill, and they sleep in shifts, always one or two awake and watching. A predator prowls nearby, drawn by the scent, but the ornithopods are well hidden and the predator moves on, unwilling to waste energy on a difficult hunt. In the forest, the Stegosaurus group stirs as one of the juveniles bleats in distress, startled by a nightmare or perhaps a real sound. The adults rumble reassurance, and the juvenile settles, pressed against its mother's flank, and the herd sinks back into rest. The forest is never truly silent. Even in the deepest part of night, there are always sounds, the creak of branches, the scuttle of insects, the distant call of a pterosaur, but these are the familiar sounds of a living world, not the silence of absence. On the coastal plain, the pre-dawn hours bring a shift in the wind. The breeze comes now from the ocean, cool and salt-laden, pushing the mist inland, and the temperature drops to its lowest point. The Apatosaurus herd shifts restlessly, the juveniles whimpering softly, and the adults move to shelter them from the wind, forming a living barrier. The frogs have gone silent, retreating into the mud, and the night birds settle into their roosts. The stars begin to fade as the sky to the east lightens, first to charcoal, then to ash, and the world holds its breath in the moment before dawn. The first light touches the volcanic peaks on the horizon, igniting their summits in shades of rose and gold, and the color spreads downward, chasing the shadows from the valleys. The mist glows from within, transformed into a sea of luminous vapor, and the silhouettes of the animals emerge like islands, dark against the pale light. A pterosaur launches from its roost, wings spreading wide, and it circles upward on the first thermals, calling out a greeting to the new day. The sound is answered by others, and soon the sky is dotted with wings, the pterosaurs heading out to feed, to fish, to claim their territories under the rising sun. The Camarasaurus herd stirs, the juveniles stretching and butting against the adults, eager to move. The lead female raises her head and bellows, a deep resonant call that carries across the floodplain, and the herd begins to walk, their footsteps shaking the ground, a rhythm as old as the land itself. They move toward a distant stand of tree ferns where the feeding is good, and as they pass, smaller animals scatter before them, pterosaurs and theropods and scurrying mammals, each following their own urgent needs. The Diplodocus pair has spent the night standing in the shallows, and as the light strengthens, they wade toward the bank, water streaming from their sides, and climb onto dry land. They shake themselves, sending sheets of water flying, and the droplets catch the light, sparkling like diamonds before they fall. The female's limp is more pronounced in the morning, the injured leg stiff from the cold water, but she pushes on, following her partner toward the grazing grounds. Around them, the floodplain comes alive, insects humming, birds calling, the rustle of 1,000 creatures going about the business of survival. In the highlands, the Stegosaurus group moves downslope toward the tree line, where the ferns grow thick and the shade offers relief from the coming heat. They walk in single file, the adults leading, the juveniles following, tails swinging for balance. A stream cuts across their path, swift and clear, and they pause to drink, lowering their heads to the water, eyes watchful. A fish darts past, startled by the movement, and one of the juveniles tries to snap at it, but the fish is too quick, and the juvenile only gets a mouthful of water. The others rumble, a sound that might be laughter if such a concept could apply, and the juvenile shakes its head, spraying water, and rejoins the group. On the shore, the tide is rising again, the ocean reclaiming the flats, and the scavenging dinosaurs retreat to higher ground, their bellies full from the night's feeding. A lone Brachiosaurus wades into the surf, letting the waves break against her massive legs, and she lowers her head to drink from a freshwater seep where a stream meets the ocean. The water is brackish but drinkable, and she drinks deeply, then raises her head and gazes out across the water, where the volcanic islands shimmer in the heat haze. Perhaps she sees nothing of significance, or perhaps some instinct older than thought draws her attention to the distant land, the drifting fragments of a continent that will, over unimaginable spans of time, shape the world to come. The young Allosaurus on the riverbank is awake and active, patrolling his territory, investigating scents, testing the wind. He comes across the remnants of his previous kill, now picked clean by scavengers, and he sniffs the bones with mild interest before moving on. A herd of small ornithopods grazes nearby, and he watches them, calculating, but they are alert and numerous, and he decides against an attack. Instead, he follows the river downstream, looking for easier prey, for the sick or the young or the unwary. The female Allosaurus near the bluff has returned to her resting place, and she settles into the shade, jaws still stained from her night's kill. She will rest through the heat of the day, digesting, conserving energy, and when evening comes, she will hunt again. This is the rhythm of her life, alternating between bursts of violent effort and long stretches of stillness, a predator's patience woven into the fabric of her being. Across the floodplain, the Apatosaurus herd reaches the tree ferns and begins to feed, their necks swaying, their jaws working steadily. The ferns are lush and green, nourished by the recent rains, and the sauropods crop them with relentless efficiency. A cloud of insects rises around the feeding animals, gnats and flies drawn by the scent, and pterosaurs descend to snatch them from the air, a brief symbiosis of convenience. The sun climbs higher, the heat building, and the day settles into its familiar pattern, a cycle repeated countless times, each one unique in its details, but identical in its rhythms. The land itself is the product of deep processes, tectonic forces that have been shaping the continents for hundreds of millions of years. Pangaea, the great supercontinent, is pulling apart, rifts opening, oceans flooding in to fill the gaps. The Atlantic is a narrow sea, Not yet the vast basin it will become, and the continents are drifting at the pace of growing fingernails, slow but inexorable. Volcanoes mark the boundaries where the Earth's crust fractures, and the climate is shaped by the placement of mountains and seas, by the tilt of the planet, and the brightness of the sun. This world is warmer than the one that will follow, the poles free of ice, the tropics extending farther from the equator, and the dinosaurs thrive in the abundance. In the cycad grove, a beetle laboriously climbs a frond, its iridescent shell gleaming blue and green in the sunlight. It reaches the tip and spreads its wing cases, preparing to fly, but a small pterosaur drops from the sky and snatches it in mid-leap, gulping it down without slowing. The pterosaur flaps upward, already scanning for the next meal, and the world goes on without the beetle, indifferent to the individual, attentive only to the patterns that persist. The river carries its burden of silt and organic matter toward the distant ocean, a slow transport of nutrients that will settle in deltas and lagoons, building layers that will one day become rock, stone pages in a book that records this moment. Trees fall and are buried, their wood turning to coal under the weight of sediment and time. Shells accumulate in reefs, and the bones of the dead settle into the mud, waiting for the chance mineralization that might preserve them for unimaginable ages. Most will vanish without a trace, recycled by scavengers and bacteria, but a few will endure, transformed into fossils, silent witnesses to a world long gone. A storm cell builds over the highlands, towers of cloud glowing white in the afternoon sun, and lightning flickers within, still too distant for the thunder to be heard. The storm will move eastward, as they always do, driven by the prevailing winds, and it will bring rain and relief from the heat, a brief respite before the cycle begins again. The animals sense the change, the drop in pressure, the shift in the wind, and they begin to seek shelter, drifting toward groves and overhangs, clustering together for safety. The Camarasaurus herd pauses in their feeding, the adults raising their heads, nostrils flaring, and the juveniles press close, sensing the unease. The lead female bellows, a call to gather, and the herd tightens into a defensive cluster, the young in the center, the adults facing outward. The sky darkens, the clouds racing overhead, and the first gusts of wind whip through the ferns, bending them flat, sending leaves and debris tumbling across the ground. The rain arrives in a wall, cold and hard, and the herd stands firm, enduring, water streaming off their backs, their eyes squinting against the deluge. The storm passes in less than an hour, moving on toward the coast, and the sun breaks through the clouds, illuminating the drenched landscape in brilliant light. Steam rises from the ground, and the scent of wet earth and crushed vegetation is overwhelming. Puddles reflect the sky, and the animals shake themselves, shedding water, and resume their routines. The world is washed clean, and the light has a crystalline quality, sharp and clear, every detail vivid. On the coastal plain, the Brachiosaurus lifts her head from the foliage and gazes westward, where the sun is beginning its descent. The light is softer now, golden, and it paints the landscape in warm tones. She resumes feeding, stripping branches with mechanical precision, her massive body a monument to the success of her lineage. Around her, the smaller herbivores graze and root, and the pterosaurs wheel overhead, and the ocean murmurs its endless song, and the world turns, oblivious to the brevity of any single life. As evening approaches, the animals begin the transition to night, the diurnal species seeking shelter, the nocturnal emerging from burrows and roosts. The Stegosaurus herd gathers in their clearing, plates cooling, tails settling, and the forest around them dims. The mammals venture out, whiskers twitching, eyes bright, and the night hunters take to the air, silent and deadly. The stars appear, one by one, and the Milky Way reasserts its dominance, a celestial river flowing through the darkness. The female Allosaurus stirs from her rest and rises, shaking off the day's torpor. She is hungry again, the previous night's kill long digested, and she sets out into the gathering dusk. Her path takes her across the floodplain, through fern thickets and over dry channels, and she pauses often to test the air, to listen, to watch. The world at this hour is filled with opportunity and danger in equal measure, and she moves with the confidence of a predator who has survived many hunts, who knows the rhythms of prey and the limits of her own strength. Near the river, a herd of Diplodocus settles for the night, standing in the shallows, and the young Allosaurus watches from a distance, calculating, but again, the opportunity does not present itself. He turns away, moving upstream, and he comes across a cluster of small ornithopods huddled in a hollow. They see him and freeze, hoping their stillness will render them invisible, but he has already caught their scent. He approaches slowly, one deliberate step at a time, and the ornithopods bolt, scattering in all directions. He chooses one and gives chase, accelerating with explosive speed, claws tearing the ground, jaws agape, and the ornithopod zigzags desperately. But the predator is faster, and the gap closes, and the hunt ends in a brief flurry of motion. He feeds quickly, tearing chunks of flesh, swallowing without chewing, and then he drags the carcass into cover and settles to eat more leisurely. The night is young and he is content, and around him the world continues its ancient dance, predator and prey, birth and death, the endless exchange of energy that drives the living world. The Apatosaurus herd has reached their favored resting place near the wetland, and they settle in the shallows, the water cool against their skin. The juveniles splash and play until the adults rumble warnings, and then they quiet, pressing close, and the herd sinks into stillness. The frogs begin their chorus, a wall of sound that rises from every direction, and the stars blaze overhead, undiminished by distance or time. In the highlands, the forest is dark, the canopy blocking even the starlight, and the Stegosaurus herd rests in their clearing, breathing in unison, a slow rhythm that speaks of safety in numbers. A mammal scurries past, intent on its own urgent business, and the dinosaurs ignore it, too small to register as threat or food. The night deepens and the temperature drops, and the mist rises again, softening the edges of the world, blurring the line between earth and sky. On the coast, the ocean reflects the stars, a mirror of the heavens, and the waves roll in with hypnotic regularity, each one erasing the marks left by the one before, a ceaseless cycle of creation and erasure. The scavenging dinosaurs have retreated to the dunes, and they settle into hollows scooped in the sand, bodies tucked, eyes closing. The larger predator that watched them earlier has moved inland, drawn by the scent of the Stegosaurus carcass, and it feeds in silence, surrounded by the smaller scavengers who wait their turn, patient and wary. The moon rises late, a waning crescent that casts just enough light to paint the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. The land is still, the air cool, and the sounds of night are muted, spaced out, each one clear and distinct. A pterosaur calls from a distant roost, and the call is answered, and then silence settles again, a pause in the conversation. The Milky Way arches overhead, a luminous band connecting horizon to horizon, and the stars within it are beyond counting, each one a sun, each one a center of potential worlds, though the animals below have no concept of such vastness. The female Allosaurus has claimed a new resting spot near a cluster of boulders, and she settles into the sand, head on her forearms, tail curled, eyes half open. She is not asleep but resting, always alert, always ready to move if opportunity or danger presents itself. The night is her domain, and she is patient, knowing that the hours before dawn often bring the unwary into her reach. Time passes, measured not in minutes or hours, but in the slow procession of stars across the sky, the gradual lightening of the eastern horizon, the subtle shift in temperature and wind. The world holds its breath in the moment before dawn, and then the light returns, first as a pale glow, then as a wash of color, rose and gold and amber, and the stars fade and the darkness retreats, and the cycle begins again. The animals stir, stretching, shaking off the night's chill, preparing for the day ahead. The Camarasaurus herd rises and begins to walk, their footsteps a drumbeat across the floodplain, and the Diplodocus wade from the shallows, water streaming from their flanks, and the Stegosaurus in the highlands move downslope toward the fern prairies, and the pterosaurs take to the air, wings catching the first thermals, and the world comes alive with movement and sound. This is Earth 150 million years ago, a planet in the middle of its long history, already ancient, yet still young compared to the ages to come. The dinosaurs are the dominant large animals, but they share the world with countless other forms, insects and fish and amphibians, and the first small mammals, each playing their part in the intricate web of life. The continents drift, the climate shifts, volcanoes erupt, and mountains rise, and rivers carve new channels, and the living world adapts, evolves, endures. Above it all, the sun climbs into a sky unmarked by contrails or satellites, a sky that has looked down on this planet for billions of years and will continue for billions more. The light falls on forest and plain, on ocean and shore, on the backs of giants and the wings of creatures learning to fly, and it asks nothing and judges nothing, simply illuminating what is, recording in stone and sediment the passage of time, the slow accumulation of moments that will one day be called the past. And in the night that will come again, the stars will blaze as they always have, indifferent witnesses to the dramas below, ancient lights from distant suns, some of which have already died, though their light still travels across the void. The animals do not look up and wonder, do not contemplate their place in the cosmos, but they are part of it nonetheless. Atoms forged in stellar furnaces, organized into patterns of astonishing complexity, alive for a brief span, contributing their thread to the vast tapestry of existence. The Jurassic world turns beneath those stars, beautiful and savage, abundant and unforgiving, a fleeting moment in the deep river of time, yet eternal in its essence, a world of becoming, of transformation, of life,